And we can start letting people in.
Oh, wait, I need you to make me a co-host. Ah,
Oh, yeah.
forgot about that part.
So did I.
I was like, why can't I see? Okay. Perfect.
Hello, everybody. Come on in. Get comfortable. Okay, welcome, everybody. Welcome.
Thank you.
If you have attended one of my other thesis workshop classes, this is basically the same class. Okay, gonna wait for a little bit for everyone to come. Hope everyone's well today. Will this be the last class? That's a very good question. There might be some more. So far, this is the last in this series. If there's something that you would like us to present, please do so. This class is the recording that will be posted online, and it will be posted in a few days. So this version will be available. But if there is something that you feel that you would like to see, for example, if you would like us to do a class on annotated bibliographies, or if you would like us to do a class on even something like grammar, we can put something together. So whatever it is that you feel that would be helpful, and if you think it's not just you, but others, maybe in your class or in other classes would like to attend, let us know. Okay, I'm gonna go get started right now, okay? So first of all, did everyone, since we're going to be defending thesis, right? Did everybody bring their weaponry? Do you have your weaponry? No? That's okay, because the pen is mightier than the sword. So we're gonna have some fun. So the first thing I'm going to do is, does someone actually have one? That would be very cool. That would be cool. So let me go ahead and I'm going to share my screen. Okay. And I'm going to share my sound. I'm going to lower this. Okay, move that down. Okay. So National History Day is quite a lot of fun. And I have been working with this for a very long time. I've been a judge on the local and the state level for about 7 years now. I also help with Maryland Humanities in doing reviews online. So what is communication? I'm not going to go into the theme too much, but I think it's important to at least touch on it. Communication is spoken, it is written, and it is heard and received. So these are all components that will be included in your project in some way. Communication can happen in gatherings. It is a key part of civics and government, obviously, and it is part of the political process. Language is key to communication. So there's a lot of different ways you can explore language. Miscommunications are also part of the story. Two-sided communication is imperative. Your teachers might have used the word asynchronous with virtual learning. So what you're looking at is synchronous. You want a dialogue, you want communication, even if it's not effective communication. Or if it's specifically not, then that's what you want to include. So your thesis statement is a blueprint. If you're not familiar with the blueprint, a blueprint is the schematic for something that you have built. It could be an engine or it could be a building, but basically it tells the reader how you're going to prove your argument, what your argument is, and how you're going to get there. And for the sake of NHD, National History Day, it has to connect to the theme. And you have to explain the significance. That is the why should I care? Now, it is also basically your project trailer. I'm sure you all have seen movie trailers. Well, a thesis statement is your little movie trailer. And just like a movie trailer, it also has a certain format. Did you know that there are specific formats for movie trailers? Oops, let's go back.
Have you ever wondered about this particular thing? Because it turns out that that thing is real. That thing I referred to earlier? Well, it's happening, and it will destroy us all. Someone has to stop this thing. And that someone is you.
You didn't think it would be that easy, did you?
I'm the one. I'm not the person who can stop this thing.
You are that person. Now take my hand! Run!
For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. I am the reaction.
And there you go. So just as there is a formula for a trailer for a movie, your trailer, your thesis, also has, well, a kind of a formula. There's a formula for that. So thesis equals topic plus theme plus impact. Okay, I have another video to show here. The Chicken Foot by Deborah Basilovich of the Howard County Library System. Is that the chicken foot? No. Is that the chicken foot? No. Is that the chicken foot? Yes, sort of. The shape of the chicken foot will guide our thesis. Our main idea goes here. The who, the what, the when, the where, the how, the why. The toes support the foot with evidence. These are our controls. The knuckle connects the ideas. Now for the fancy chicken, or the reverse chicken foot. It has the same parts, but it's backwards. with more connectors, creating a more complex structure. The main idea is also called the argument or the controlling idea, and the supporting toes are the controls. Think of it as a leash for your chicken. Don't let your chicken escape. They have a habit of running away. So the chicken foot controls your argument. For example, let's say you were doing an NHD project, National History Day. National History Day projects require cause and effect. So the cause can be the foot and the effects can be the controls. You can also do it the opposite way. You could have the effects be the main idea, your argument, and all of the causes be your controls. Your chicken foot could have 2 toes or 2 controls, or it could have 3 controls or even 4. Thank you for watching. I hope this helps. So that's the basics. And if you're curious, I'm going to send this out with you when we're finished. This is, there's a chicken foot exercise for thesis development and a roadmap. And I think that it's very helpful and very useful. There's also buckets. We're going to get to the buckets in just a moment. So, historical interpretation. That's the process of assembling primary source evidence and analysis into a coherent argument. But what is that? So, here's an example. Martin Luther King Jr. was a key figure in the civil rights movement. That's true, but it's kind of hard to argue against. Here's this one. Martin Luther King Jr.'s intellect and religiosity made him a key figure of the civil rights movement. Okay, well, that's good. Why should I care? While Martin Luther King Jr. served as an important figure in the movement, most of the actual work for civil rights was undertaken by scores of local groups rather than a single charismatic leader. So here you'll see it's getting more interesting. So like a project trailer. Okay, so here you're saying, well, he was important, but the actual work was being done by local groups rather than a single charismatic leader. So here you have something in there that can also be argued against. It is interesting. It's a little different. So an historical argument makes a claim about the past and supports it with evidence from primary sources. The best historical arguments make a claim that is compelling or interesting in some way. In other words, a claim that is reasonable, that a reasonable person could imagine an objection to. Okay, so we're going to have another little example here. And I'm going to move this out of the way so I can read this. So Robert E. Lee's Confederate Army was much smaller than the Union Army. His men marched on short rations and many of them lacked shoes. Nevertheless, the troops marched towards Gettysburg confident of victory. They arrived on July 1st. So, does this sound like a thesis? Let's take a look at it. There's a lot of information there. It says here that his army was smaller than the Union Army. Well, that could be fact-checked. His men marched on short rations and many of them lacked shoes. That could be fact-checked. And they marched confident of victory. Well, that might be something you'd have to prove. And when did they arrive? Well, there's not really an argument here, right? It is basically what we call a narrative. It's telling a story. Okay. 1 second. There it is. So now we go to this one. While Lee's Confederate Army was smaller than the opposing Union force, see, we took that idea from the top, numbers alone would not decide the outcome for the battle. because they had already prevailed 5 times over their larger, better equipped foe. That's why they were confident. Lee's men marched towards Gettysburg confident of victory. So now we know why they were confident. Leadership would be more important than numbers in the battle. Okay, so this makes an argument. Okay, and I want to point out where that is. We have a while and a because. Those are those knuckles that we talked about. Leadership would be more important than numbers in the battle. So there's the why should, the interesting bit. Okay, so now we're going to do a little exercise. Here we have a historical poster. It says here, someone talked. Okay, and if you take a look, just go ahead and look at the poster and see what you see. I'm going to go to the next page. So the poster shows a sailor drowning. The background is inky black water. White lettering reads, someone talked. Only the sailor's head and arm are visible. The subject is pointing at the viewer. The poster is from 1942. Well, this is all very accurate and informative, but it's not an argument. It's not a thesis. It is a narrative. So let's see what happens next. The 1942 poster sends a powerful message. A drowning sailor appears centered between white letters that read, someone talked. The mood feels dark. The sailor points an accusatory finger at the viewer. Here, this is analysis. The poster tries to influence behavior by suggesting that the viewer's own careless talk might be responsible for avoidable deaths at sea. So that's what you did right there. That's interpretation is and historical interpretation is the process of assembling primary source evidence and analysis into a coherent argument. An agency is the ability to make consequential decisions that affect historical events. So you are going to be looking at individuals or groups that had agency, that actually had the ability to make these decisions and did. These were not accidents. Okay, so now we're going to look at, is it mostly descriptive writing? Is it mostly analytic writing, or is it a mix of both? Let's take a look at the first one. You can just go ahead and type into the chat what your answer is. So this is looking at this poster right here, okay, from the Library of Congress. The election of 1876 was the most contentious and consequential election of the 19th century. The Republican candidate, Rutherford Hayes, only prevailed due to the corrupt bargain struck by self-interested politicians. That bargain was the primary reason that Reconstruction failed to deliver racial justice to Southern Blacks. So, do you think this was descriptive writing? Do you think that this was analytical writing, or do you think it's a mix? Go ahead and write those down. So it's mostly analytical writing. Okay, so it was very analytic. Okay, here's the next one. Harriet Beecher Stowe published Uncle Tom's Cabin in 1852. It would go on to sell 300,000 copies in the United States. The evil slave owner Simon Legree became one of the most infamous villains of 19th century fiction. So what do you think about that one? Descriptive, analytic, or a mix? And descriptive also is narrative or descriptive. Mostly descriptive, it's telling a story. So here's another. The Equal Rights Amendment, first approved by the House in 1971, remains one of the great missed opportunities in American politics. The amendment enjoyed bipartisan support in Congress. It eventually received 35 of the required 38 state ratifications. Ultimately, it was doomed by the work of Phyllis Schlafly, who argued that the amendment would actually leave women with fewer rights by removing legal protections and exposing them to the draft. So what do you think about this one? So it's kind of a mix of both. It had some information, but it was balanced. Okay, so this is kind of like what we were looking at in the chicken foot, okay? It's structured a little bit differently, okay? So you have your argument, whatever that argument is going to be, and you have your reasoning and the evidence you need to support it, okay? So that's kind of like what we had already talked about. And you can see that the argument, fairly short, how much how many words, let's just say how much meat is in the reasoning section and how much is in the support. So there's a lot in the support. Okay, so let's say you want a bike from your mom or dad. Here's the argument. I want to get a new bike because here's the why. Why should I care? Why should I give you the bike? I'm very responsible. And here's all of the evidence. My room is clean. I get up for school on time by myself. I babysit my younger sister. I've got good grades in school. I'm too tall to ride my old bike. Now, all of those things, all of that evidence, you would assume the parent can confirm. They can prove that or disprove. They could go up to the room and see if it's clean. They know, let's hope, of their child's grades. So this would be the argument. Okay, let's take a look at some pictures. Okay, and since this is all related to women's suffrage, okay? And here is a picture of a woman outside a union. This is a little article of women who were they were discussing the concept of suffrage with other women and how they were exposed to the idea. So this is a flyer. Okay, this is an image, okay, a picture of a parade. You can see they also have some banners, and they have a very specific sort of stylistic dress. Okay, so this is a playbill. So someone made music and wrote out some lyrics, votes for women. You can buy it for 10 cents in Philadelphia. This is a postcard, and you can see, for the work of a day, for the taxes we pay, for the laws we obey, we want something to say. So this would be something that would obviously potentially cross the United States, depending on where it was mailed. So this is a really interesting article about a Chinese American who really wants to vote, and she was part of the suffrage movement, but it also talks about other restrictions just from being Chinese. I don't know if you're familiar with the Chinese Exclusion Act. So this is an interesting piece. This is a letter, okay, and basically it's being written as a sort of back and forth to figure out what this person is going to take with them to, they're going to speak overseas in Europe, where the venues that they're going to go to, why, who are they going to connect with, what are some things that would work for this audience. Here is a group of African-American women. This is outside of a church, and they were actually meeting. It was a suffrage meeting, and this was their group. And then there's this tintype. Okay. Then we have another article, okay, by an African-American woman talking about her role and how often she was asked by those in more visible in the movement to try to be invisible, to not walk with them in parades, to try to stay in the background a little bit. Okay, so when doing this, your thesis should emerge from evidence. In other words, you've done this research. Let's say that those were the things you just were looking for primary sources, and you went on to the Library of Congress and just looked for women's suffrage. And those were the materials, the source, the documents you came up with, okay? And now that's what you have, and that's what you're going to use, let's say. So let's make sense of them. So that's the evidence, and your thesis has to come out of that evidence, okay? The thesis does not, you don't come up with your thesis first and then look for the evidence, okay? A lot of people do that. So we talked about buckets. Your teacher might have talked about buckets, okay? So if we looked at that, all of the sources that I talked to you about just now, you could break them into 3 different categories, okay? The one would be communicate a new image, okay? How are you communicating a new image? Well, there were parades. We have that, protests in Washington. Women active in the political process. How are they active in the political process? They had speeches, flyers. Another bucket will be various forms of media. We have a lot of different kinds of things, right? Here's using the popularity of newspapers and accounts of imprisonment as well. Songs, postcards, flags. You saw them in some of the pictures. And the other one is interesting, did not understand the needs of women of color. So we have African-American women in the parades. Where were they? Where were they relegated to? And it did not address barriers to voting, for example, Jim Crow, and citizenship barriers for, again, going back to the newspaper featuring the Chinese American, and also US territories. Those are mentioned in some of those. Okay, so, and that's fairly loose, but once you start doing some research, if you can start to make files or folders and see what things go together based on your interests. So here's an example. Thesis from 1900 to 1920, national leaders of the women's suffrage movement changed their communication strategy and promoted a new image of women, which, here's that transition, led to the passage of the 19th Amendment. That's what it did. That's the cause and effect right there. Leaders used various forms of media to appeal to a wide variety of women. However, the lack of understanding of the needs of women of color left many of them without the vote. So there's the why is this important, okay? Okay, so we set the topic. Oops, let's go back, sorry. Oh yeah, no, that's right. Sorry, I don't mean to bounce around. So set the topic, okay? So the national leaders of the women's suffrage movement. You know it's suffrage, right? That's the topic. Okay, set the parameters. The parameters are the time, 1900 to 1920. There could be other parameters. Could be, you know, America, it could be other places. You could have a number of different parameters that you want to include. Clearly connect to the theme. Here we have communication strategy and understanding. Okay, so the key to understanding, right? So this is the lack of understanding. You don't necessarily have to use those words. Now, is this an argument? That's an argument. Here it is right here. Promoted a new image of women, okay, that you're going to have to argue, which led to the passage of the 19th Amendment. And then the lack of understanding of the needs of women of color left many of them without the vote. So there you go. So what does that look like? Okay, so just as you have to use that chicken foot for your main thesis, well, after you establish those buckets, you're going to have a thesis for each one. Now, it doesn't have to be, if you're doing a big board, this big sign that says thesis for each section, but you will have a thesis statement somewhere in there to basically, again, do that little blueprint. So the big chicken foot, then what you're going to do is take those controls, pull that out. That's what this is right here. And you're going to make another argument. right? So here, the first one, if you remember the bucket, right? Leaders promoted a new communication strategy because they wanted to promote a new image of women, okay? So there's your because. And now here's your evidence. We have those photographs, okay? Women were seen as iconic images. There's teachers, garment workers, college graduates. So a lot of different kinds of images that were not necessarily the traditional woman of the time. So some protests, and then we had the flyers that engaged people in the public, and that Terrell letter, which was talking about giving speeches in Europe. Okay. All right. So now we go to that second bucket. The second bucket we had leaders used new forms of media and venues because they wanted to engage people in the discussion and promote their cause. That makes sense. We have the newspaper account where women were speaking. They were being interviewed and they were writing for their responses about suffrage. Newspaper article in the Colored American making the case to publications targeting the subgroups of Americans, right? So that was a specific kind of newspaper targeting a certain group, right? So that would be a specific venue. Those postcards, sheet music, so it's integrating into the popular culture and children's culture. And then that photo of the women at their Baptist convention, there it was being discussed in a religious setting. In our third bucket, we had leaders failed to understand the need of women of color because they didn't see this as a priority over the passage of the Equal Rights Amendment. Okay, and then racism in the movement, okay, and take a look at the delegates, take a look at what was happening there, and bring in that article. And did not understand the barriers to voting for African Americans and new citizens, and did not address the needs of women in most of the United States territories. So there you have it. That's how you could break it down. And while we didn't go over a lot of research right there, that could very well get you started. So basically you want an argument that expresses the topic's significance and demonstrates how the theme plays a central part. Again, the topic, then you also have to talk about the impact, the immediate and the long term. It has to explain what the research can prove or support with the appropriate facts and details. Again, evidence. And every sentence in the project should support your argument. If you have extras, you know, you're letting it run away. You've got to rein that in. So ask yourself, is it clear what the project is about? Okay, in the thesis, in your trailer statement, is it clear? Is it arguable? Are you taking a position? Is there something that has to be proven? It's not something that you can just simply look up and it's a fact. Will research be necessary to prove the thesis? That should always be a yes, by the way. Is there only one main idea? Also should only be a yes. Is it about something in the past that is important? And why? Okay, so you want to start with a research question, and it could be very broad, right? You want to start broad. What do you want to learn? Okay, so let's say I'm interested in Orson Welles' production of War of the Worlds. If you're not familiar with that story, so there is a book, science fiction, fabulous classic, a little scary, and it was written by H.G. Wells, no relation to Orson, and basically it's about aliens coming down to Earth. There's been several movies and remakes, but what happened in 1938 was Orson Welles, who was an actor performing on the air, radio, because that was before TV. And he had an acting troupe. And basically what they did was they took books and they read them or acted them out over the radio. and he was assigned they were all assigned War of the Worlds. He didn't want to do it because he thought, you know what, this is not going to be believable. Okay. And so he decided to change the script because he couldn't get out of it and make it more realistic. It was originally set in France and it was already pretty dated material by the time he got it. So he wanted to update it, set it in the present, and make it seem like it was happening in real time. He was really going to use the medium of the radio in a whole new way. Well, it scared some people. People didn't realize that maybe this wasn't a show. So first thing I want to learn is, did it really scare people? Okay, because I've heard it did, but is that really true? So I need to research enough to be able to take a position, right? So his Orson Welles' realistic version of War of the Worlds broadcast live over the radio fooled people, scaring them. Well, still not much of a position. I'm saying that it scared them, but why? What does it matter? Orson Welles' innovative live documentary style production of War of the Worlds in 1938 proved too successful, as some listeners mistook the broadcast for genuine news content, which created a panic, exposing the nation's vulnerability to potential deliberate deception by enemies exploiting radio technology, heralding calls for regulation of the medium. So that's a mouthful, right? But if you do the research, you see that they were taken to court and they had to answer for what they had done. Okay, so going back to your thesis, keep it short. Between 40 and 60 words is a good target, okay? Every word is precious. Provide just enough information to explain your argument, okay? Okay, so now this is up to your teacher. I'm going to tell you it can be multiple sentences. It really can, unless your teacher says it can't, and then it can't. Defer to your teacher on that. But for the purposes of NHD, they're okay with multiple sentences. Avoid adverbs and find a stronger verb. In fact, you really should think about that all the time. Never use adverbs if you can avoid them. Active voice saves words and reads easier. What is active voice? Well, here's an example. Wild penguins attacked my sister. Well, that sounds, well, interesting and promising. No, kidding. Or my sister was attacked by wild penguins. See how many more words it adds? So passive voice, I find, is very common in a lot of NHD papers, that people that are thinking of past tense almost always start to also lump that in with this passive voice. And here you could do past tense in active, and it reads much faster. You save words, and it's much more engaging for the reader. Avoid superlatives, okay? If you're going to say something is, you know, anything with an EST at the end, be sure that you can prove that. And it's very, very difficult. If you say this was the main argument, if this was the main reason for something, that is a hard thing to prove, okay? Usually there are multiple causes for any given event or situation. So you can, it's a lot safer to say that it was a contributing cause. So be very careful of superlatives. Quantifiers. A quantifier is something that basically sets an amount. So you hear the words some, many, very, never use those. Never, never, never. Unless you absolutely have to, unless there's no other way, unless the idea that you have to communicate requires that. But try to avoid those. Or if you have to quantify, be specific. And always, always avoid the word very. It's the worst word. And there I used a superlative. So, and you have to include all 5 W's, right? Who are the important people or groups? Where did it happen? What happened? What is it? When did it happen? How did it impact politics, societies, cultures, economies? Why should I care? I keep saying, why should I care? I put this in over the side. Do not what if, right? So what if is great if you wanted to speculate in fiction, but speculative questions don't work in an argument or really throughout the project. What I see a lot is there's often a what if down by the conclusion some way. Like if this didn't happen, we never would have had French toast, you know, something to that effect, right? But you don't know that. That is not something that can be proven with evidence. So be careful of that. That will snag you. Okay, so you want to include the theme words. Okay, words that are related to both communication and understanding must be present. Okay, and I just have like disregarded, encoded, interpreted, lied. These are all words that would represent, but they're not exactly the word communication or understanding. You want to leave out the facts, leave in the arguments. What is the main point? Be specific, but save the details for inside the project. Test the strength, okay? So is there at least one possible opposing position? Also, you want to have that addressed somewhere, if not in the thesis, then in the project, a counterclaim as it were. How would you argue against the topic's significance in history? How would you argue against it? Could someone argue that the topic is significant for another reason? And how would you refute those arguments? You got to think about that. And the more you think about it, the stronger your thesis will be, the stronger your project will be. And why is your view stronger? And again, write, revise, research, revise. Okay, so those are some basics. I have here a couple more evidence-based sentence starters. You know, those are helpful, and you can find more online, but here you see like this timeline illustrates how this passage provides some insight into the nature of. So it's showing the evidence and it's showing, well, this is what this means. This evidence means this. And you are showing analysis. Analysis is very, very important. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Okay, everybody. Hello, hello. So now we have a little bit of time, and I would like to go over other ideas that you might have. This is probably a little early for many of you in the process, but if you do have any topic questions, you can anonymously message Julie Naylor. She is another Howard County Library instructor. She is the co-host. And we can see if we can help you with that. Now, obviously, I'm not going to have the time to do the research, but we can take a look at maybe what the angle is as far as communication or understanding, how you want to, you know, where that lens comes in at, if you have some of those. Okay. Also, if you have any questions about the format, about the idea of the chicken foot, oh, this is the thesis class. Sorry, someone might have done the thesis class already. Oh, you don't have to email her. You can just, at the bottom, you just, if you open up the two, there's a menu, and Julie Naylor is listed as the co-host.
Okay, so we have one It says, how might I make a thesis about radar and air sirens during the Blitz?
Okay, so radar and air sirens were a form of communication right there. So that would fit. They were warning. And they were also new technology. So you could take it from the perspective, you could take it like, telephones, and how did they revolutionize and change war. So you could talk about how the technology itself revolutionized the city and city preparation. And let's see, air sirens and radar. Right, so the radar was going to warn when the attack was imminent. And then you can also show before radar how vulnerable people were. And you also want to look at the pros and the cons. Okay, so the advantages, and then maybe the disadvantages. Maybe it was confusing. Maybe they didn't know where to go. Maybe did it cause more panic? Let's see. I don't know if, I'm sure you can find statistics on how many people, or at least, maybe an average of how many people hid out in different shelters. And I know that you'll definitely be able to get people talking about the air sirens. You should be able to find that. So those would be really good sources. Because what did it communicate to them when they heard that? And then you can also talk about the impact, like what does it communicate to them now if they hear a siren? Is it, well, later, they might not be alive right now, but maybe you can find information on how it affected them psychologically later on. And that's another kind of communication, internal communication, right? You're communicating with yourself. So go ahead.
So she added to it a little bit. So she's trying to argue that the air sirens and the radar contributed to how the Allies won the Blitz. So
Okay.
the role that they played in the actual Blitz.
I think that that's, I think that that is very good, because the radar itself, the technology, was key, okay, to knowing when the attacks were coming and how to prepare for it and do a counterattack. It took away the element of surprise. It also took away the element of panic or warning. They had a plan. So the people who were in charge of fighting, regardless of what branch of the military they were in, they could do their jobs without where there was a plan in place, as opposed to worrying about those that were getting hit. And they could, those that were getting in imminent danger, they had a plan and they can enact it. I think that that organization was very helpful. So you can look at, obviously, the technology, the forewarning, right? So it allowed them to combat the force, right? Strategically. so that they could see where the enemy was coming and they could come up with a very strategic attack as opposed to just being reactionary and a little bit late. And then the organization on the ground for the air sirens, that also helped. It saved lives. It saved, think about the psychological worry and the fear. By having that, you know, they could concentrate on the enemy. And you were looking at how they won the Blitz. So not the whole war, but just that section. I think you could do that. Let's see. I'm trying to think. You can compare it to how they were before, but you need another component. One more thing. I'm just going to look on here. One second. It made, obviously, the Royal Air Force much more effective. Okay, you also want to think about the difference in that Blitz war versus the others. Germany had to go over the channel, and they required surprise. If they didn't have surprise, they're not going to make it back. Also, here's, let's see. Oh, here I was just glancing at one thing. So numbers. So you didn't have to have as many. You could do a lot more with fewer people and fewer pilots, because it would be the early warning system could target more precisely. You knew where they were coming, so you could put your forces there as opposed to spreading them out. And right. And so they can also take advantage of the fuel requirements. So okay. And then, of course, it was copied. But I think you could definitely argue that it saved the Battle of Britain. And one of the reasons why it made the RAF more effective, okay, they needed fewer, and this is just basic, and this was just me glancing. So how were they more effective? You know, fewer numbers. It was targeted and accurate. And it could play on Germany's disadvantages. So there's a few things right there. And that doesn't even begin to get into the air sirens. Okay. Any other questions? Any other possibilities? This is going to be a short one tonight, I think. I think I talked very quickly tonight. Another thing you can take into consideration with the RAF and radar is how did they communicate this technology both to their troops and to the public? Did this help morale? if it helps morale, then it's going to have an impact, hopefully positively. But that's another argument that you can make if you can find some evidence to support that. Was the radar a secret or was it not? Although I imagine once they, a couple of wins under their belts made the pilots quite bold after that. Well, it looks like we're going to be finishing a little early today, if we don't have any other questions. Okay, so when in a couple of days, you'll get a response, and we'll also have some documents included in there that you can use as templates. They go into bucketing and creating the thesis. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Mhm. Trying to stop recording. It's not letting me. Do you want to